a month or so ago, I think it was, Lorna and I were travelling in the car when we heard an interview on the radio of someone who described himself as a cuddle practitioner. A cuddle practitioner. I'd never heard of that before, but seemingly there are therapists who offer a safe, structured space for consensual, platonic, non-sexual physical touch. Maybe a hug, maybe just holding hands, maybe just resting side by side. And many people are willing to pay for this, up to something like €80 an hour. Because in our increasingly isolated and lonely societies, many people are touch deprived. They're desperate for touch. And this can have a huge impact on both their mental and their physical health. Studies consistently show the importance of touch on our well-being. We know it's vital, don't we, for the health and the development of babies, to have that physical touch. It can help buffer both physical and emotional pain. You know, if you're going to the doctors and you're going to get something done, you want somebody to hold your hand there because it makes it feel better. And scientists say it releases oxytocin, which is called the cuddle hormone, which is associated with feelings of comfort and safety and affection and lowered heart rate and bonding. Possibly as a result of all of this, people who receive higher levels of affectionate touch, are less likely to suffer from chronic inflammation, which is a risk factor for numerous diseases. Now, of course, we need to be careful because not everybody responds to touch in the same way. None of this gives us as an excuse to invade someone's private space. But a lack of physical touch can have a really bad impact on us. It can increase rates of depression and anxiety, and can make social interaction really difficult. This can be seen among those who were teenagers during the COVID pandemic. Remember that 6 years ago when we were to keep our 2-meter distance from everybody, wear our masks? As they've grown up, people have noticed that so many of them are now less inclined to cooperate with others, less likely to form friendships, and less likely to engage in those small but meaningful gestures of touch because they've learned not to do it. Touch is vitally important for our well-being. Clearly, Jesus understood our need of this. As we read through the Gospels, we see him willing to reach out and touch others, even people that everyone else kept their distance from. So we're going to read one of those instances today in Luke chapter 5, verse 12, through to verse 16, and Paul is going to come and he's going to read for us this morning. Thank you, Paul.
Luke 5, verse 12. While he was in one of the cities, there came a man full of leprosy. And when he saw Jesus, he fell on his face and begged him, "Lord, if you will, you can make me clean." And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, "I will, be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. And he charged him to tell no one, but go and show yourself to the priest and make an offering for your cleansing, as Moses commanded, for a proof to them. But now even more the report about him went abroad, and great crowds gathered to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities. But he would withdraw to desolate places and pray.
Thanks, Paul. A man came along who was covered in leprosy. I think we're so removed from this time and culture that we could easily miss the shock of that little statement. Leprosy was a terrible disease that led to horrible disfiguration and eventually death, because this time it was incurable. So this man here was in a hopeless situation. He'd been given a horrible death sentence, and he was simply waiting for what seemed inevitable. But this wasn't just a health issue. The Old Testament law spoke about this. In Leviticus chapter 13, it says this: the person with such an infectious disease must wear torn clothes. Let his hair become unkempt. Cover the lower part of his face and cry out, "Unclean, unclean." As long as he has the infection, he remains unclean. He must live alone. He must live outside the camp. So these people like this man covered in leprosy, were segregated as outcasts from society. In part, this seems to have been to try to prevent the spread of this disease. But it was also because they were unclean in God's sight. As God's holy people, the community of Israel had to be separate from the uncleanness in the world. And that included people who carried a fatal disease, who were like the living dead. So this man, covered with leprosy, was excluded from his family, excluded from his community, excluded from worshipping God at the temple. I think the normal reaction to this man would have been to turn away from him, or even out of fear to shout at him, or to throw stones at him to try and keep him from coming near to him. In most people's eyes, this man was unclean and unwanted. Someone to be avoided. Someone to be forgotten. But I don't think this was just how other people felt about him. I think it was also how he felt about himself. Look at verse 12. When he saw Jesus, he fell with his face to the ground and begged him, "Lord, if you were willing, you can make me clean." Now, in a way, this is an amazing statement of faith. Perhaps this man had heard about some of the miraculous things that Jesus had already done. Perhaps he started to believe that Jesus was the Messiah, the anointed one sent from God. Whatever the reason, this man didn't seem to struggle to believe what seemed impossible. That Jesus had the power to heal him. But he had a problem. He knew that Jesus could heal him. He just didn't know whether Jesus was willing to heal him or not. He was confident of Jesus' power, but he was uncertain of Jesus' love. Maybe this was because this is how everybody else treated him. If he'd been abandoned by his family, by his community, by God's people, then perhaps this is how God thought of him. If other people were not willing to care about him, then why would Jesus? I think there are many people in this world today who are like that for a whole host of different reasons. Maybe today we even feel the same right here this morning. Because our world values the beautiful, the clever, the successful, the interesting, the funny, the strong. Those are the celebrities that have thousands of Facebook friends or Instagram followers or YouTube subscribers. But if we don't fit into that image, then it's easy for us to feel unimportant, unloved. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, a guy called Mephibosheth, He'd been crippled in both of his feet after an accident when he was just a child. But then King David, he wanted to show him kindness for the sake of his father, Jonathan, who had been a really close friend of David's. But Mephibosheth couldn't understand this. This is what he said to David. Listen to it in 2 Samuel chapter 9. What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me? This guy felt worthless because he didn't fit into the image in his culture of what an important person looked like. Sometimes our culture tells us that we're not important, that we're not loved. Or maybe if someone has hurt us, or rejected us, or abused us, then we might start to believe their cruel words. Their lies can have an impact on our hearts and crush our souls. Psalm 22. It's a powerful prophecy pointing forward to the sufferings of Jesus on the cross. But initially, when David wrote that psalm, he was expressing his own struggles as a result of being attacked by other people. So, for example, in verse 6 he said this, I am a worm and not a man, scorned by men and despised by the people. Sometimes our culture makes us feel unloved and unimportant. Sometimes our experiences make us feel like that. Sometimes it's our own mistakes and our own failures that make us feel too messed up, too broken, too unclean for anybody really to bother about. I think Joseph's brothers were like that. In our summer camp this year, we were talking about how Joseph had declared his love and forgiveness to his brothers who had absolutely impacted his life in such a terrible way. And yet he loved them and he expressed forgiveness to them, even bringing them from Canaan into Egypt to look after them during the famine. But even after all of this, even after Joseph declaring his love and declaring his forgiveness and expressing this love and this care, after all of this, they still doubted whether their brother could truly love them. When their father died, they worried, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrong things we did to him? They felt they'd done such a wrong thing that they could never truly be loved and valued by their brother Joseph. And this might not just make us question other people's love for us. It might also make us question God's love for us. Maybe we're so messed up that God can't even love us. Maybe you remember 2 weeks ago how Peter responded to that miraculous catch of fish by saying to Jesus, "Go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man." He felt so worthless because of his sinfulness in comparison to the holiness of Jesus. And that's a desperate situation to be in. If we are so aware of our sin that we feel unworthy of God's love and that we need to keep our distance from Him, then really we are in a worse situation than this man covered in leprosy. So the question is, how could Jesus overcome this man's feeling of unworthiness and reveal God's love to him? Well, one way was through a miraculous healing. He healed this man's body with a word. Look at verse 13. I am willing. Be clean. And immediately the disease was banished. His skin was restored. His body was healed. It was another miraculous event that shows the wonderful power and authority of Jesus. His ability to do the impossible. And it's also a powerful picture of the power of the gospel to restore everyone who comes to Jesus for salvation. No matter who we meet, what issues or problems that we might have, or what people have or haven't done, the gospel that we're called to share is the gospel of God's power to save completely. Like Paul, we can declare, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, because it's the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes. Jesus has the power to heal. He has the power to save. But I'm sure you noticed that this wasn't all that Jesus did. Jesus didn't just heal this man with a word. Before he healed him, look at verse 13. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. Jesus didn't need to touch this man to heal him of leprosy. His words did that. But Jesus wanted to do more than just administer a cure from a distance. He wanted to demonstrate God's love and acceptance. And he did this with a touch. In fact, this word here, touch, it means that he gripped him. It wasn't a kind of hesitant, tentative kind of tap. Rather, it was a warm and firm and wholehearted grasp. This was a touch of love. Mark records that when Jesus saw this man and he heard his doubt-filled plea, he was filled with compassion. This means that Jesus was moved right down deep in the depth of his being. Literally, it means in his gut. Jesus felt this man's pain and suffering. He was moved by his loneliness and his lack of self-worth, and it moved him to reach out and to take hold of him. And this was a costly love. According to the Mosaic law, it made Jesus unclean. For that moment, Jesus shared in this man's uncleanness. He was willing to be contaminated for this man. He was willing to step in and be involved in his problem. Before he was healed, before his skin was made new, before his body was whole, while he was still unclean, unwanted, unattractive, and in the world's eyes unlovable, Jesus grabbed hold of him to declare his value, his worth. That no matter what, he was loved by God. In that moment, Jesus was again demonstrating that God is love. And that his love is unconditional. His love is unending. His love is unlimited. And Jesus is willing to do the same in our lives. He's willing to reach out and touch us in our messed up lives. He's willing to be associated with us even before we're all cleaned up. He's willing to be with us in our problems and our issues. He's willing to reveal God's love to us. This is what the cross is all about, isn't it? God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. In love, Jesus touched us in our sin. And he took upon himself our sinfulness so that we could experience his righteousness. Jesus became unclean so that we could become clean. So if you're here this morning and you haven't yet experienced Jesus' loving touch, then you can experience this today. You can run to him. You can invite him in. And the Bible gives us this incredible guarantee that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Because he loves us, Jesus is able and willing to save each and every one of us. But if this is who Jesus is, and this is what Jesus wants to do in our lives, then this is also the example that Jesus wants to follow, us to follow. In this touch-starved world, we as the body of Christ, if we've trusted in Jesus, we are called to reach out to others who feel unimportant and unloved. We are called to express love and care to them. We are called to offer comfort and healing to them. We are called to be the embodiment of his heart. Last time, we were thinking about Jesus' call in our lives to share the message of the gospel with other people around us. Although we may have a whole list of reasons about why we can't do it, if we've trusted in Jesus, then he's called each one of us, as it were, to put out into deep water and to let down the nets for a catch. To go out and be involved in making disciples. To go out and involved in catching men and women for Christ. This is God's call in our life. But if our motivation, if this is what we're called to do, our motivation for this mustn't just become kind of cold-hearted sense of duty or obligation. Yes, we are called to obedience, but it mustn't just be obedience. Because if Jesus came to declare God's love to a hurting world, if he came to invite them into a loving relationship with God through the sacrifice of himself, and our job is to take that message to the world, then our involvement in that mission must also be motivated and directed by his love. It must be a mission of love. Many years ago, when Lauren and I left Scotland to come here to Ireland, an old guy in our church gave me a verse in the Bible. He's now with the Lord in glory, but I hope I'll always remember what this verse is. This is the verse, 2 Corinthians 5:14. For Christ's love compels us. Christ's love compels us. It's understandable that our first instinct is to turn away from the mess that's in this world. Our first instinct is to run from all of the pain and suffering that we can see. Our first instinct is to long just for an easy and comfortable life without the cost of caring for other people. But if we've experienced the compassion of Christ, if we've received his touch of acceptance, if we've been forgiven through his loving sacrifice, if we've been adopted into his family, if his love is poured into our hearts by his Holy Spirit, then this love should compel us to lovingly reach out to other people around us, to touch their lives, to care for them in their struggles, to share His message, to invite them into His salvation. Jesus didn't turn away from the problems of the world. He was willing to let the pain of others impact the deepest part of His being and motivate Him to reach out and care. And if we belong to Him, then so should we. This was the driving force of Paul's evangelism. This is what he said in Romans chapter 9. I have great sorrow and unceasing anguish in my heart, for I wish that I myself were cursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my brothers, those of my own race. That was Paul's heart. He cared so deeply for his people that he would have done anything that he could to introduce them to Jesus. Even, as it were, if it was possible, he would be willing to go to hell for them. Of course, he couldn't do that. But that's how he felt. Do we have that same passionate love for the people around us? For our family members who are not yet trusting in Jesus? For our neighbours? For our work colleagues? For the people that we meet down the town? Does our heart break for them? But finally, we need to do this irrespective of the response. After healing this man, Jesus told him this in verse 14. Don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing, as a testimony to them. Now, initially this sounds really strange, doesn't it? Why would Jesus not want this man to go around telling everybody? Well, I think part of the reason is that Jesus was encouraging this man to respect the law of God that he was under as a member of the Mosaic covenant. There were sacrifices to be made for his cleansing. There were procedures to follow. And Jesus was encouraging this man to follow the law that he lived under. But also it seems that Jesus wanted his healing to be a clear and undeniable witness to the priests, the ones who were in charge of whether this guy was truly healed and could be accepted back into society. In examining this man and finding out why and how he'd been healed, these priests would have been able to see who Jesus really was. It would have been a powerful testimony to them. But I think this was it was early on in Jesus' ministry. And Jesus wanted people to understand what his mission was really about before they went and told everyone about him. They needed to understand that his mission was about more than just the healing of a body. His mission was about saving sinners. His mission was about forgiveness. His mission was about their greater need. We'll see that next week if you come back and we look at the next passage. So Jesus told them not to say anything to anybody, but to go and show himself to the priest. But this man didn't do that. Mark gives us more details about that. He says he went and told everybody around. As a result, the crowds of people came to hear Jesus and he healed them of their sicknesses. To some extent, it sounded like that was a great result. It was great that loads of people came to hear about Jesus. But unfortunately, they came to receive from Jesus much less than he wanted to give them. They were coming for healing of their bodies, where he came to save their souls. But I think this is also a revelation of the depth of Jesus' love. This man's disobedience hindered Jesus' mission. But the amazing thing is Jesus knew that he would respond in this way. And yet Jesus still loved them. He still cared deeply about him. He still reached out and touched him. He still healed him. This is what we need to do in our evangelism. We're called to reach out to people, whether or not they respond as we would like. Whether or not they ever thank us or respect us for how we shared Jesus with them. Whether or not they ever, in the end, put their trust in Jesus. Evangelism is supposed to be the expression of a heart that is so filled with God's love. His unconditional love for sinners. That we understand that it's worthwhile. And it's honouring to God. Whatever the outcome. Because it's an expression of God's heart of love. God does not just love those who will eventually love Him back. He loves everyone. Even those who turn their backs and walk away. And we are called to do the same. So in this touch-starved world, where so many people are hurting in isolation and loneliness, Jesus wants to come near to us. He wants to touch our hearts with His love. And bring the forgiveness and the restoration that we so desperately need. So this morning, let's run to Him in the confidence that He is not just able, but that He is willing to make us clean. And then, let's allow His love to motivate us to reach out to those around us with the good news that Jesus is able and willing to save them too.